Welcome to Lovellous, a gentle space for healing love stories. You are listening to Sunlight Through the Rain. Chapter 1. Bittersweet Beginning. Sunlight filtered through the cracked window blinds of a modest apartment, casting soft lines across a small mattress pushed up against a peeling wall. Raina stirred beneath a checkered blanket, her short brown hair tousled and cheeks still warm from sleep. The alarm clock blinked a tired red. 6:30 a.m., she stretched, then sat up and looked around the room with a quiet smile. The space was tiny, but it was hers. A sanctuary in the midst of a city that rarely slowed down. A slightly tilted bookshelf stood against one wall, filled with second-hand novels and glass jars labeled Rent, Groceries, and Dreams. The only window overlooked a patch of city life, crowded rooftops, tangled streets, and the distant noise of people in motion. It was a life built on repetition. Raina had no family left and only a handful of acquaintances, none close enough to call friends. Her days revolved around work, odd jobs, temp shifts, anything that paid enough to cover the basics. By evening, she would return to this quiet room in the boarding house, eat a simple meal alone, and sleep. She'd become invisible, the way people struggling to survive often do, moving through the world without leaving much of an impression. There were nights she cried until sleep claimed her. Tears for the loneliness, for the crushing feeling of not belonging anywhere, of drifting through life without direction. But time and pain had taught her something important. No one was coming to rescue her. If she wanted light, she had to walk out of the dark herself. Now, older and steadier, she'd learned to stop putting impossible pressure on herself, to accept that some days surviving was victory enough. Being kind to herself was enough. Being here was enough. Every morning, before she stepped into the noise of the world, Raina would stand in front of the small mirror above her sink and smile at her reflection, not because she felt joyful, but because she had learned that sometimes choosing to smile was an act of quiet defiance, a promise to keep living, a small spark of strength. The weather forecast had mentioned a possibility of rain later. Hearing that made her smile. Her mother had named her Raina because she was born during a thunderstorm. "You came with the rain, and you made it beautiful," she used to say. Even now, years after her mother had passed, Raina still found comfort in rainy days. Today was her first shift handing out chocolate samples at a posh shopping center. She grabbed a banana for breakfast and her small umbrella, then locked her door with the temperamental key that required just the right touch. As she stepped into the crisp morning air, she whispered to herself, "Let it rain." By late morning, Raina stood behind a chocolate display at the center of the mall. The stall gleamed with elegant packaging and gold accents. A cheerful banner read, "New arrival, Strawberry Dark Delight." She handed out her first few samples with ease. Her voice was gentle but clear, and her smile never felt forced. It was more than a job for Raina. It was a series of small connections, brief moments where she could brighten someone's day with nothing more than genuine warmth and a piece of chocolate. Each smile she received in return felt like a tiny victory against the world's tendency toward coldness. She was offering a sample to a teenage couple when she noticed the change in atmosphere around her. Conversations didn't just quiet, they ceased entirely. Shop employees who had been chatting moments before snapped to attention, adjusting uniforms and fixing displays with sudden urgency. Raina looked up to see her walking toward them. The woman descended the escalator like royalty claiming a throne, each step deliberate and commanding. She wore power like other people wore perfume, subtly but impossible to ignore. Her black suit was perfectly tailored, emphasizing sharp shoulders and a narrow waist. Her dark blue hair caught the artificial lighting and seemed to shimmer with its own inner fire. But it was her eyes that made Raina's breath catch, grey as storm clouds, and carrying the same electric potential for destruction or renewal. This had to be someone important. The way every employee in sight reacted to her presence spoke of either deep respect or deeper fear. Possibly both. As the woman drew closer, Raina found herself studying her face with an artist's eye for detail. The features were classical, almost severe in their perfection. High cheekbones, a straight nose, lips that looked like they rarely curved upward. She had never seen someone who looked like that. Not just beautiful, but untouchable. Sharp and poised like a blade. The kind of person who seemed to walk through the world without needing anyone. And yet, something about her eyes, those storm grey eyes, held a depth that pulled Raina in. Behind the mask of professional composure, she glimpsed something that looked almost like exhaustion. Loneliness? The same expression she sometimes caught in her own mirror after particularly difficult days. Without thinking, she picked up a chocolate sample and stepped forward. "Good morning," she said softly, holding out the small, gold-wrapped piece. "This is our new flavor. I hope it brings a little sweetness to your day." A genuine smile bloomed across her face, as natural as breathing. The woman stopped walking. For a moment that felt suspended outside of time, their eyes met. The woman's gaze flicked down to Raina's name tag, then back to her face. Without speaking, she accepted the chocolate. Their fingers brushed for the briefest instant, and Raina felt a small shock of connection. Not physical, but something deeper. A recognition that passed between two people who understood what it meant to carry hidden burdens. Then she walked away. As soon as the woman disappeared around the corner, two co-workers from the chocolate store rushed over. "Are you crazy?" One whispered urgently. "Do you know who that was?" Raina blinked. "No, should I?" "That's Vivian Laurent, executive director of the whole shopping center. Her father owns half the district. She's scary as hell. She's known for being ruthless. People call her the Ice Queen." The other added, "She doesn't smile. Ever." Raina looked in the direction where Vivian had vanished. "She's beautiful, though. Like a rose in winter," she murmured. The others exchanged glances, then laughed. "Just be careful. Roses like that have thorns." Vivian's penthouse apartment occupied the entire top floor of one of the city's most exclusive buildings. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the skyline, and the interior was a masterpiece of modern design. All clean lines, expensive materials, and carefully curated art. A place to retreat to, but never to belong. She stepped into the sleek, cavernous space, where silence greeted her like an old companion. The professional shell she wore so perfectly during the day began to crack the moment she crossed the threshold. Behind the polished exterior that commanded boardrooms and intimidated subordinates was a woman fraying at the edges, held together by sheer force of will and the armor of success she had forged from years of isolation. Vivian kicked off her heels the moment she walked through the door, letting her bare feet touch the cold marble surface. The city lights twinkled beyond the massive windows, creating patterns of light and shadow across the polished floors. She had chosen this apartment not just for its prestige, but for the distance it provided. Up here, she could observe life without fully participating in it, could maintain the careful separation between herself and the messy complications of human connection. She poured herself a glass of scotch from the crystal decanter on her bar cart, the amber liquid catching the light like liquid gold. The ritual was as familiar as breathing now, the burn of alcohol against her throat, the temporary numbing of edges that had grown too sharp over the years. She ignored the ache behind her eyes, a persistent reminder of the stress she carried in her body like a physical weight. A cigarette joined her fingers a moment later, lit with a quiet flick of silver. Smoke curled into the dim room like a ghost. Returning home, and she exhaled slowly, watching the wisps dance and vanish into the atmosphere. The scent of alcohol and tobacco clung to her like a second skin, familiar companions in her solitary evenings. She settled at her desk, laptop open, emails flooding in like an endless tide. Reports, numbers, demands. The work kept her focused, kept her from thinking too deeply about the emptiness that echoed through her personal hours. Hours passed unnoticed. As she worked, the city gradually settling into its nighttime rhythm beyond her windows. When hunger finally gnawed at her, cutting through the haze of work and alcohol, she walked to the kitchen. The refrigerator was nearly empty, as always. A few bottles of mineral water, half a lemon, a forgotten yogurt container pushed to the back. Then she remembered the chocolate. She had tucked it into her jacket pocket without thinking, and somehow it had made the journey home with her. The small piece sat in her palm, wrapped in delicate paper that felt fragile against her fingers. It was the one the part-time girl had handed her this morning during her inspection. Raina, she recalled now, though she rarely bothered to remember the names of temporary employees. The girl had smiled so brightly, said something ridiculous, like, "Hope your day is as sweet as this chocolate." Vivian had taken it not out of interest but instinct, like catching a memory before it could disappear. She unwrapped the chocolate bar with careful fingers, as if it might crumble at. Rough handling, dark chocolate, she discovered as she took the first bite. Slightly bitter, exactly as dark as her usual mood. But then came the filling strawberry. Sweet, unexpected, almost playful. The contrast was jarring, the sudden burst of sweetness. Against her tongue foreign after years of cultivating a preference for bitter things. She closed her eyes, allowing the flavors to mingle, to create something complex and surprising on her palate. She took another bite, then another, finishing the bar in contemplative silence. The chocolate had satisfied something she hadn't realized. She was hungry for not just food, but connection, however brief and tentative. Outside, the city lights blurred behind the raindrops, transforming into impressionist strokes of color and motion. In her mind's eye, a stranger appeared, short brown hair, a smile like sunlight. The image was so vivid she could almost feel its warmth, and for once, she realized she didn't need the scotch to ease her into sleep. It remained untouched on her desk, forgotten, as she sank deeper into the sofa, drawing the blanket tighter around her shoulders. Miles away, in a small apartment, Raina lay in her narrow bed, her mind drifting to a beautiful woman with stormy grey eyes. Though she hadn't spoken a word, something about her presence remained imprinted in Raina's mind. She whispered to herself, smiling faintly, "I hope she liked it." Raina turned off the lights and drifted into sleep, not knowing that somewhere, far above the city, in a quiet room of glass, the woman she had once likened to a rose in winter had just finished that very piece of chocolate, and was thinking of her. As sleep finally claimed them both, the rain served as a gentle conductor, orchestrating a symphony of possibility across the sleeping city, weaving invisible threads between two women who had shared nothing more than a moment and a piece of chocolate, yet had somehow managed to touch something essential in each other's carefully guarded hearts. Chapter 2. Sharp Edges. The ballroom shimmered beneath crystal chandeliers, each scattering golden light into 1,000 tiny stars. Soft music drifted through the air, mingling with quiet conversation, and the occasional clink of glassware. The scent of old money hung thick. Champagne, polished silver, expensive perfume. Raina moved through the crowd in a black server's uniform, balancing a silver tray of champagne flutes with practiced ease. Gowns rustled like autumn leaves, air kisses flew, and business cards exchanged hands like playing cards. She was refilling glasses at a corner table when she saw her. Vivian Laurent sat at the head table, still as a statue, yet commanding the room. Her midnight blue gown shimmered like liquid starlight, perfectly matched to her hair. She looked as untouchable as she had that morning, but something in her posture was different. Tense, guarded. Beside her sat an older man, rotund and smug, fingers brushing Vivian's bare shoulder as he leaned in. Raina's stomach twisted. His hand slid lower, arm settling around Vivian's waist. Vivian's spine stiffened. Her fingers clenched the stem of her wine glass until her knuckles whitened. Raina could see it. The barely contained fury, the decision forming. She's going to throw it, Raina realized. Right here, in front of everyone. Before she could think twice, Raina grabbed a glass of red wine from her tray and moved. Her steps were quick, deliberate. As she neared the table, she stumbled, just enough. The glass slipped, burgundy liquid splashing across Vivian's gown in a dramatic arc. Gasps rippled around them. "Oh my God, I'm so sorry," Raina said, breathless, grabbing napkins from the table. "I'm such a klutz. Please forgive me." The man recoiled, pulling his arm away. Vivian sat frozen, staring down at the stain. Then her eyes met Raina's. In that instant, something passed between them. Understanding, recognition. "Let me help you," Raina said softly, extending a hand. "The bathroom, we can get to it before the stain sets." A beat passed. Then Vivian stood, her movements fluid, composed. She took Raina's hand. Raina felt the weight of countless stares as she led Vivian through the ballroom. Whispers followed them, half hidden behind champagne flutes. The marble beneath their feet stretched like a stage, each step echoing through the vaulted room. The ladies' room, all marble and warm light, felt like a refuge. As the door shut behind them, the party noise softened to a distant murmur. Raina moved to the sink, soaking napkins while Vivian stood silent before the mirror, inspecting the dark stains spreading across her gown. "I'm sorry," Raina said, approaching with the damp cloths. "Here, let me." She reached toward Vivian's shoulder, but Vivian caught her wrist in a flash, spun her around, and pinned her gently against the wall. Their bodies were suddenly close. Too close. Raina could see the silver in her eyes, the tension in her jaw, the faint trace of perfume that curled around her senses. "You did that on purpose," Vivian said, voice low, not accusing so much as certain. Raina's pulse hammered against her throat as she struggled to form words. "No. I. But the lie died on her lips under the weight of Vivian's stare. "He was touching you," she whispered finally, the words barely audible. "You looked like you wanted to stop him but couldn't. So I acted." Vivian's eyes bore into her. The space between them pulsed with something sharp and uncertain. "I don't need your help," Vivian said, her voice arctic. "Stay out of other people's business." The words landed like a slap. This was the Ice Queen the other employees had warned her about, all sharp edges and defensive armor. Vivian released Raina's wrist and stepped back, smoothing down her ruined dress. Without another word, she turned and walked toward the door. Raina stayed where she was, heart pounding, the echo of Vivian's touch lingering like the scent in the air. She had never been the type to insert herself into other people's problems. But something about seeing Vivian trapped in that situation had ignited a protective instinct she didn't know she possessed. When she finally returned to the ballroom, Vivian had vanished. Only the memory remained, the heat of her grip, the fire in her eyes, and the devastating precision of her words. Yet, despite the clear message to stay away, Raina couldn't shake the feeling that beneath all that ice and anger, something real had flickered between them. Maybe she was wrong, but maybe she wasn't. The rain struck Vivian's face like cold needles as she stepped out of the hotel's entrance. The valet rushed forward with an umbrella, but she waved him off, heels clicking against the wet pavement. Her wine-stained gown clung to her body, growing heavier with each step toward the parking garage. The sting of the rain cut through the numbness left behind by the night's events, and she welcomed it. Physical discomfort was simpler than the storm churning inside her. By the time she reached her penthouse, she was soaked to the skin, shivering. She didn't turn on the lights. Water trailed behind her as she stripped off the ruined dress and stepped into a hot shower. The scalding stream offered temporary solace, washing away the cold, but not the memory of unwelcome hands or the heat of her own anger. Later, wrapped in a silk robe, she poured herself a glass of whiskey. Then another, and another. The burn was familiar, numbing, but even as the alcohol blurred the edges of the night, one image remained sharp. Raina, her flushed face, the way her eyes had held concern instead of fear, steadiness instead of judgment. Vivian wasn't used to that. To kindness without motive, to someone stepping in for her, not because they had something to gain, but because they simply cared. She had been cruel, defensive, but Raina had looked at her like she was worth protecting. As her body sank into the cushions and her breathing slowed, it wasn't the scotch that soothed her into sleep. It was the memory of brown eyes, unwavering and warm, that lingered in the dark. The shrill chime of the doorbell jolted Vivian awake. Morning light streamed unforgivingly through her uncovered windows, a harsh glare that pierced through her aching skull. Her mouth was dry as sandpaper, her limbs heavy with the weight of fever and exhaustion. The silk robe twisted awkwardly around her body as she forced herself upright, every movement sluggish and disoriented. Her feet hit the cold floor, and she shuffled to the door like a sleepwalker. She expected no one. To her surprise, Raina stood in the hallway, holding a modest bag of cleaning supplies. Her brown eyes widened slightly as she took in Vivian's disheveled appearance. Pale skin, tousled hair, flushed cheeks. For a few long seconds, neither of them spoke. The air between them was thick with hesitation, unspoken memories hanging like mist. "I'm the cleaning service," Raina said finally, her tone careful. "From the building management. You're on my schedule, Tuesdays and Fridays." Of course, Vivian had forgotten that she had recently hired a part-time housekeeper through the building's management service, someone to come in twice a week to maintain the pristine facade of her life. The cosmic irony of the situation, that the universe had somehow conspired to place Raina in her home during her most vulnerable moment, was not lost on her. She stepped aside, voice a hoarse rasp. "Come in." Raina entered quietly, her footsteps soft against the marble floor. Vivian barely made it back to the sofa before collapsing onto it, her body sinking into the cushions with a groan. Her head throbbed and her vision blurred when she tried to sit up. She reached for the water pitcher on the coffee table, but it was empty. Too drained to stand, she let her head fall back and closed her eyes, hoping the world would stop spinning if she held very still. A moment later, she felt a cool hand press against her forehead. Her eyes opened slowly to see Raina leaning over her, one hand checking her temperature, the other offering a fresh glass of water. "You're burning up," Raina murmured. "You have a fever." Vivian accepted the glass gratefully, her fingers brushing against Raina's in the exchange. The brief contact sent an unexpected jolt through her system, more effective than caffeine at cutting through the fog in her brain. She took a careful sip of water, the cool liquid like a blessing against her parched throat. "Just do your job," she said, her voice regaining some of its usual sharpness despite her weakened state. "No need to worry about me." Raina said nothing. She rose silently and moved through the apartment with quiet precision, dusting shelves, straightening books, wiping surfaces. But her eyes kept flicking toward the sofa where Vivian lay. When she finished cleaning, Raina glanced again at Vivian and hesitated. Vivian looked paler than usual. The fierce lines of her expression were softened by exhaustion, her usual sharpness dulled by fever. Raina slipped out without a word and returned 20 minutes later with a small bag of groceries and fever medicine. She moved into the pristine kitchen like someone who had lived there for years. The apartment, usually hushed and immaculate, began to hum with life. The gentle bubbling of broth on the stove, the chop of vegetables, the hiss of ginger hitting hot water. These soft domestic sounds wrapped around the space like a blanket, subtle but grounding. Raina moved with practiced ease, every motion filled with quiet intention. She didn't know what compelled her to go this far. Vivian had clearly drawn lines. Still, something about her, her vulnerability masked in ice, made it impossible to walk away. When the congee was done, Raina ladled it into a bowl and placed it carefully on the table beside a glass of water and fever medicine. She looked down at Vivian. She lay curled beneath the blanket, her brow furrowed even in sleep, as if her body had forgotten how to fully rest. Her face, even in illness, still held a quiet, almost regal elegance. Yet beneath that grace were the telltale signs: dark circles under her eyes, dry lips, fingers twitching in restless sleep. She didn't seem untouchable now. She just looked tired, lonely. Raina gently spread the blanket over her again, tucking it around her shoulders. She just stood there for a moment, watching her with quiet eyes. Her hand hovered, almost touching Vivian's temple. Before pulling back, she left without saying goodbye. Vivian woke to the scent of ginger and warm rice, her body still aching but lighter somehow. She sat up slowly, blinking at the scene in front of her. The bowl of congee, the medicine, the water, all placed with care. She stared at them, heart knocking faintly against her ribs. Someone had taken care of her, not because they had to, not out of obligation, but because they chose to. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself, suddenly unsure of what to feel. Her eyes darted to the door, half expecting someone to still be there. But the apartment was still, silent, except for the echo of something warm and unfamiliar lingering in the air. And for the first time in a long time, the silence in her penthouse didn't feel hollow. It felt full, not with noise, but with presence, with memory. She was alone, yet somehow not entirely. Chapter 3. Walking in the Rain. The morning sun filtered through the mall's skylights as Raina arranged the chocolate display with practiced precision. Raina was offering samples to the early shoppers when she heard a small voice call out, "Mommy, Mommy, where are you?" She looked down to see a little girl, perhaps 5 years old, with wide brown eyes and pigtails askew. The child stood in the middle of the walkway, turning in circles as her voice grew more panicked with each call. "Sweetheart, are you lost?" Raina asked gently, kneeling down to the girl's eye level. The little girl shook her head with surprising seriousness. No, I'm not lost. My mommy is lost. She went somewhere and I can't find her. Raina couldn't help but laugh softly, charmed by the child's logic. Well then, how about we go find your lost mommy together? The girl's face brightened immediately. Really? You'll help me? Of course. Raina reached into her display and wrapped one of the chocolate samples in decorative paper. Here, you can have this while we look for her. What's your name? Emma, the girl said, accepting the chocolate with reverence. This is really pretty. Is it magic chocolate? Maybe a little bit, Raina said with a conspiratorial whisper, taking Emma's free hand. All the best chocolate has a little magic in it. From the upper balcony, Vivian Laurent leaned against the railing, watching silently. Ever since that day when Raina had nursed her through a fever and quietly left without asking for anything in return, Vivian had felt something shift. Inside her, she tried to dismiss it as curiosity, perhaps gratitude, but deep down, she knew it was something else. Now she found herself transfixed by the sight of Raina, walking patiently alongside the small girl, both their heads turning left and right as they searched the crowd. There was something tender about the way Raina moved, her entire focus devoted to making the child feel safe. When Emma tugged on her hand to point at something, Raina immediately crouched down to follow the girl's gaze. When Emma grew tired, Raina lifted her effortlessly, settling the child on her hip as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Vivian felt an unexpected longing bloom within her. She had never been comfortable around children. The reunion, when it came, was swift and emotional. A frantic woman in a business suit came running across the courtyard, tears streaming down her face as she scooped Emma into her arms. Even from her distant vantage point, Vivian could see Raina's glowing smile as she watched mother and daughter embrace. Vivian found herself smiling without realizing it, a soft expression that would have shocked anyone who knew her professional persona. There was something about Raina's instinctive kindness that moved something deep within Vivian's carefully guarded heart. Raina had just returned to her chocolate stand after helping little Emma reunite with her mother, her heart still warm from the child's grateful hug, when the sharp trill of a phone ringtone cut through the ambient mall noise. She looked up to see a woman approaching her display. Blonde hair swept into an elaborate updo, designer handbag clutched in one manicured hand, and a small white Pomeranian tucked under her other arm like a living accessory. Without so much as a glance at Raina, the woman placed her phone on speaker and set the dog directly onto the chocolate display table. The little animal immediately began trotting across the display, sniffing and pawing at the carefully arranged samples. Darling, you simply must tell me about the charity auction, the woman said loudly into her phone, completely oblivious to the chaos her pet was creating. Excuse me, Raina said gently, stepping forward with concern. I'm sorry, but pets aren't allowed on the woman held up one perfectly manicured finger in a silencing gesture, not even looking at Raina as she continued her phone conversation. The Pomeranian tried to reach something that had caught his interest, and Raina watched in horror as several pieces of chocolate tumbled to the floor with soft thuds. Acting on instinct, Raina gently reached out and took hold of the dog's small collar, trying to guide him away from the display before he could cause more damage. The moment her fingers touched the rhinestone-studded leather, the Pomeranian erupted into high-pitched, indignant barking, his entire small body rigid with outrage at being handled by a stranger. Precious, what's wrong, baby? The woman's attention snapped to her pet, and her expression immediately darkened as she took in the scene. Raina's hand on her dog's collar, chocolate scattered across the table and floor, and her beloved Precious, in obvious distress. She ended her phone call and turned to face Raina with a kind of cold fury. "What do you think you're doing?" Her voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "Take your hands off my dog this instant." "I'm so sorry," Raina said quickly, immediately releasing the dog's collar. Precious continued barking, now adding in pathetic, whimpering sounds as if he had been gravely wounded. "I was just trying to keep him from. You were manhandling my Precious," the woman interrupted, scooping up her pet and cradling him against her chest, as if he were a traumatized child. "Look how upset you've made him. He's shaking." Raina glanced around at the mess on her display table, then back at the woman. "Ma'am, I understand you're concerned about your dog, but pets aren't allowed in the food service areas. It's a health department regulation, and don't you dare lecture me about regulations." The woman snapped, her voice rising to a pitch that was beginning to attract attention from passing shoppers. "Do you have any idea who I am? I'm Mrs. Sterling. My husband has invested millions of dollars in this shopping center. We practically own half the stores in this mall." The name meant nothing to Raina, but the woman's tone made it clear she expected instant recognition and deference. "Furthermore," she continued, her voice carrying across the mall corridor, "I was having an important phone conversation when you decided to assault my dog. Precious is a purebred Pomeranian. He's worth more than you probably make in a year. The trauma you've caused him is completely unacceptable." Raina felt her cheeks burn with a mixture of embarrassment and frustration. She could see other shoppers slowing their pace to witness the spectacle, mall employees pausing in their duties to stare. The familiar weight of powerlessness settled on her shoulders as she realized there was nothing she could say that would make this situation better. People like Mrs. Sterling didn't listen to people like her. "I apologize if I startled your dog," Raina said carefully, fighting to keep her voice steady despite the humiliation burning in her chest. "I was only trying to protect the food display." "Honestly," Mrs. Sterling continued, "the quality of staff in this mall has really declined. When people like this are allowed to work in food service, it reflects poorly on the entire establishment. I'll be speaking to management about having you replaced with someone who understands how to treat valued customers." Each word hit Raina like a small slap, designed to remind her of her place in the world's hierarchy. She could feel tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, not from sadness, but from pure frustration at her own helplessness. "Is there a problem here?" The voice sliced through Mrs. Sterling's tirade like a blade. Raina looked up to see Vivian Laurent approaching, her presence drawing every eye nearby. She moved with quiet authority, storm-grey eyes calmly assessing the scene. Mrs. Sterling's entire demeanor shifted in an instant. The aggressive posture melted into something approaching deference, though her grip on Precious tightened noticeably. "Ms. Laurent," Mrs. Sterling's voice became honey-sweet, though there was still an edge of complaint beneath the sugar. "I was just addressing a serious concern about the conduct of your staff. This person," she gestured dismissively at Raina, "physically grabbed my dog and caused him significant distress. The level of unprofessionalism is simply unacceptable." Vivian's gaze moved deliberately from Mrs. Sterling to the chocolates scattered across the display table, then to Raina's flushed face, and finally back to Mrs. Sterling. When she spoke, her voice carried the kind of calm that felt dangerous. "I see. And how exactly did your dog come to be on our food service display in the first place, Mrs. Sterling?" The question was asked with such casual politeness that it took Mrs. Sterling a moment to realize she was being challenged. "Well, I was taking an important call, and Precious is very well behaved." "I'm sure he is," Vivian interrupted smoothly. "However, mall policy is quite clear that pets aren't permitted in food service areas, regardless of their behavior. Additionally, our displays are not designed to support animals. which creates both hygiene concerns and potential safety issues for the pets themselves. The shift in power was subtle but unmistakable. Mrs. Sterling's face began to flush beneath her perfectly applied makeup as she realized that her expected ally was not taking her side. Our staff members are trained to prioritize food safety and customer welfare. In this case, our employee was doing exactly what she should have done, protecting both your pet and our products from a potentially harmful situation, Vivian said, with terrifying calm. Raina felt something flutter in her heart that had nothing to do with fear and everything to do with amazement. No one had ever defended her like this, not with anger or aggression, but with the kind of cool, unassailable logic that left no room for argument. Vivian wasn't just protecting her job. She was validating her actions and her worth as a person. Mrs. Sterling looked around at the small crowd that had gathered, suddenly seeming to realize that she had become the center of unwanted attention. For all the wrong reasons. Precious had gone quiet in her arms, as if sensing his owner's deflation. I was simply trying to ensure proper customer service, she said weakly. And your concern is noted, Vivian replied with professional courtesy. In the future, I'd suggest speaking directly with management rather than confronting individual employees. The dismissal was polite but unmistakable. Mrs. Sterling gathered what remained of her dignity, adjusted her grip on her dog, and walked away with as much grace as she could manage. As the small crowd dispersed, Vivian turned to Raina, and her expression softened in a way that made Raina's breath catch in her throat. "Are you all right?" she asked, and there was genuine concern in her voice. Raina started, then stopped, overwhelmed by a mixture of gratitude and something deeper that she couldn't name. "Thank you." Vivian knelt down beside her, helping gather the scattered chocolate pieces. In that moment, watching Vivian Laurent, executive director of the entire shopping center, kneeling on the mall floor to help clean up a mess she hadn't made, something shifted deep within Raina. This wasn't just about power or authority. This was about basic human decency, about seeing her as someone worthy of respect and protection. The afternoon brought an unseasonable rainstorm that turned the city streets into rivers of silver. The bus stop was crowded with people seeking shelter, office workers clutching briefcases, shoppers with wet shopping bags, teenagers huddled together under insufficient awnings. Everyone pressed together under the small shelter, their conversations a mix of complaints about the weather and impatient checking of phones for bus schedules. Raina stood among them, her thin jacket pulled tight around her. Water dripped steadily from the edge of the shelter's roof, and she had to step back periodically to avoid getting soaked. That's when she heard the low purr of an expensive engine pulling up to the curb. A sleek black Mercedes reversed until it was parallel with the bus stop, drawing curious stares from everyone huddled under the shelter. The passenger window rolled down smoothly, and Vivian's voice cut through the sound of rain. "Get in. I'll drive you home." The conversations around Raina ceased entirely. Every eye at the bus stop turned toward them, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed envy. She could feel the weight of their collective gaze as she hesitated for a moment that stretched between them like a question. The contrast was stark. Vivian in her luxury car, and Raina standing among the crowd of ordinary people waiting for public transportation. Finally, she clutched her bag tighter and darted through the rain, very aware that dozens of eyes followed her every movement. She slid into the passenger seat, shivering slightly. "Thank you," she said, pushing wet hair back from her face as Vivian pulled away from the curb. "I wasn't expecting the rain to be this heavy." "I should be thanking you," Vivian replied, pulling back into traffic, "for taking care of me when I was sick, and for what you did at the party the other night. I never properly expressed my gratitude for either." Vivian glanced over to find Raina studying her with those brown eyes. "If you really want to thank me," Raina said with a mischievous smile, "you could buy me dinner. I'm absolutely starving, and I know just the place." The request was so unexpected that Vivian found herself agreeing before her usual defenses could kick in. "Where did you have in mind?" "Turn left at the next light," Raina directed, her smile widening. "I hope you don't mind casual dining." 20 minutes later, Vivian found herself parking her Mercedes outside a narrow alley that seemed too small for cars. The contrast between her sleek vehicle and the modest neighborhood couldn't have been more stark. "We'll have to walk from here," Raina said, producing a small umbrella from her purse. "The restaurant is just down this way." She opened the umbrella with a soft click, and suddenly the world condensed to just the two of them. "Come here," Raina said softly, stepping closer to Vivian with an intimacy that felt both natural and electric. Vivian's breath caught as Raina moved into her space, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from her body despite the cool rain. Raina had to stand on her toes slightly to hold the umbrella high enough to cover them both, and the movement brought her even closer, until Vivian could smell the subtle vanilla scent of her shampoo mixed with the clean smell of rain. They began walking, their steps naturally synchronizing as they moved through the narrow alley. "I love walking in the rain," Raina said softly, her voice carrying a dreamy quality that made Vivian want to memorize every word. "There's something magical about it, don't you think? Like the world gets washed clean and anything becomes possible." Vivian found herself studying Raina's profile in the grey light filtering through the umbrella. There was something luminous about her in this moment, raindrops clinging to her eyelashes like tiny diamonds, her cheeks flushed pink from the cool air, her lips curved in that gentle smile that seemed to be Raina's natural expression. She looked like someone who had never learned to be afraid of joy, who embraced life with an openness that Vivian both envied and was drawn to like a moth to flame. When they reached the restaurant, a tiny place with mismatched chairs and handwritten menus, Vivian felt every eye in the room turn toward them. She was overdressed, out of place, a figure from a different world entirely. But Raina seemed oblivious to the stares, guiding them to a small table by the window with the same easy confidence she brought to everything else. "The owner's family makes the best chicken and dumplings in the city," she said, settling into her chair without a trace of self-consciousness. "I come here whenever I need comfort food." As they waited for their order, Raina chatted easily about her day, the weather, the little girl they'd helped reunite with her mother. Her presence transformed the simple restaurant into something warm and welcoming, making Vivian forget about the curious glances from other diners. "Can I ask you something?" Vivian said during a lull in the conversation. "How many jobs do you actually have?" Raina laughed, the sound bright and unguarded. "Too many, probably. The chocolate sampling is just weekends. During the week I clean offices. Sometimes I help with catering events, and I pick up shifts at a bakery when they need extra hands. Nothing permanent. Nothing with benefits. Just whatever pays the bills." She spoke about her situation matter-of-factly, without self-pity or embarrassment, and Vivian found herself admiring that resilience. "That's a lot of work," Vivian said quietly. "Have you always had to juggle so many jobs?" Raina's expression grew more thoughtful, her fingers absently tracing patterns on the condensation of her water glass. "I dropped out of high school during my senior year," she said simply. "My mother got sick and someone had to work to pay for her treatment. The jobs I could get without a diploma, well, they don't pay much individually. So I learned to do whatever I could." She passed away a year later. "I'm sorry," Vivian said softly. Raina smiled, but it didn't quite reach her eyes. "Thanks," It was a long time ago. She was all I had, though. Since then, it's just been me. Vivian felt something clench in her chest at the quiet strength in Raina's voice. And she spoke about it as though it was simply what anyone would do, rather than something extraordinary. After finishing their meal, they stepped out into the steady drizzle, walking the short distance to Raina's boarding house. The two of them walked side by side down the narrow alley. The world felt quieter in the rain, like it was holding its breath just for them. They didn't rush. Their steps matched in rhythm, their bodies brushing lightly as they moved together through the softened night. Then, from the opposite end of the alley, a man appeared, slightly disheveled, his footsteps uneven, his gaze lingering a second. Too long on them. Vivian's body stiffened before she even realized it. Without thinking, she reached out and pulled Raina closer, her arms slipping around Raina's shoulders in one smooth, protective motion. Raina let out a small breath of surprise, but didn't resist. Her body settled naturally against Vivian's side, as if that spot had been waiting for her all along. The man passed without incident, muttering something unintelligible as he veered off the path. But Vivian didn't let go. She told herself it was just precaution, that the threat hadn't fully passed. But the truth, clear and unignorable, was that she didn't want to let go. Not yet. Maybe not ever. Raina fit against her like a missing piece. The kind of presence that made Vivian feel like the world could slow down and be kind, even for someone like her. Raina didn't speak. She couldn't. Her heart was pounding so loudly she feared Vivian might hear it. The warmth of Vivian's arm, the subtle strength in her fingers, the way her body radiated heat even in the chill of the rain. It was overwhelming in the gentlest way. Her cheeks flushed, not just from proximity, but from the awareness that this meant something. To her, maybe even to Vivian. When Vivian finally, reluctantly, withdrew her arm, the absence of touch left behind a trail of warmth that lingered. Their eyes met for a second. No words, just breath and rain, and something trembling between them like a string drawn taut. They reached the boarding house all too soon. She was about to thank Vivian for the ride, for dinner, for everything. But Vivian spoke first. "Would you consider working for me full-time?" The words tumbled out before Vivian could stop them. Born from an unexpectedly strong desire to keep this warmth in her life. "As my housekeeper, I mean, I could pay you more than you're making from all your part-time jobs combined." Raina blinked, stunned. Her fingers tightened slightly around the umbrella handle. "You don't have to decide now," Vivian added quickly. I think I'd like having you around. And I could use the help." There was a beat of silence, then Raina smiled. Slowly, softly. A kind of smile that reached all the way up into her eyes. "Are you serious?" she asked, barely above a whisper. Vivian nodded. She reached into her purse, pulled out the spare key to her penthouse, and pressed it gently into Raina's palm. "You could start tomorrow. Move in whenever you're ready." Raina looked down at the key resting in her hand. Something about it felt heavier than metal. It felt like an invitation. Like trust. Yes, she breathed, the words trembling with something more than excitement. "Yes, I would love that." And just like that, the space between them closed, not physically, but emotionally, quietly. In the gentle hush of rain, beneath the glow of a flickering streetlight, something new took root between them, tender, wordless, and real. Chapter 4. Recipe for Happiness. The elevator doors opened to reveal the familiar marble foyer of Vivian's penthouse, but something was different. The air itself felt warmer, infused with the rich aroma of something simmering on the stove, and the subtle fragrance of fresh flowers. As Vivian stepped through the doorway, she paused, her briefcase slipping slightly in her grip as she absorbed the transformation of her space. The sound of her heels on the marble was answered by the soft padding of bare feet approaching from the kitchen. Raina appeared in the doorway, flour dusting her apron and a radiant smile lighting up her face like sunrise breaking through storm clouds. The sight of her, so naturally at home in this space that had never truly felt like home to Vivian, sent a warmth spreading through her heart. "Welcome home," Raina said, the words carrying a weight that made Vivian's breath catch. "Something smells incredible," Vivian managed, setting down her briefcase and following Raina toward the dining area. The transformation was subtle but profound. Where once there had been empty surfaces and clinical precision, now there were small touches of life. A single red rose sat in a simple glass vase at the center of the dining table, its petals catching the light from the chandelier above. The table was set for two, with simple white plates that somehow made the space feel more intimate, more real. The meal itself was beautifully uncomplicated: roasted chicken with herbs, perfectly steamed vegetables, and bread still warm from the oven. "I brought some of my plants from the boarding house," Raina said, gesturing toward the balcony, where several small potted flowers now lined the railing. "I hope you don't mind." Vivian looked through the floor-to-ceiling windows at the small garden Raina had created on her balcony, bright splashes of color against the backdrop of the city's steel and glass. The space did feel more alive, more vibrant, more like a place where someone actually lived rather than simply existed. "I love it," she said. "The apartment feels more alive." "And the rose," Raina said, her cheeks flushing slightly. "When I saw it at the flower stand this morning, it reminded me of you. Something beautiful but guarded, with thorns to protect itself." Vivian's fork paused halfway to her mouth as she absorbed this simple declaration. The comparison caught Vivian off guard, and she felt heat rise in her cheeks. After dinner, Vivian retreated to her home office as was her habit, but found herself distracted by the sounds of Raina moving through the apartment, washing dishes, humming softly to herself, the whisper of fabric as she folded laundry. When a shadow fell across her desk, she looked up to find Raina holding a steaming mug. "I brought you some chamomile tea," Raina said. "I thought you might like something warm while you work." "Thank you." Vivian's fingers brushed Raina's as she reached for the mug, and she felt that same small shock of connection she'd experienced at the chocolate stand weeks ago. Raina moved behind her chair, and Vivian tensed, unsure of her intentions. Then, gentle hands settled on her shoulders, thumbs working at the knots of tension that lived permanently in her neck and upper back. "You carry so much stress here," Raina murmured, her touch careful but firm. "When was the last time you relaxed?" Vivian couldn't remember. Under Raina's ministrations, muscles she hadn't realized were tight began to unknot, and she felt herself melting despite her best efforts to maintain composure. The massage itself was innocent enough, but Vivian felt her entire body respond to Raina's gentle touch. Each movement of those warm hands across her shoulders sent unfamiliar tingles down her spine, making her acutely aware of every breath, every heartbeat. The tenderness in Raina's touch, so careful, so caring, made something flutter dangerously in Vivian's heart. "Better?" Raina asked, her hands stilling but not withdrawing. "Much better," Vivian managed, her voice slightly hoarse. "Thank you." She opened her eyes to find her reflection in the dark computer screen, Raina's face visible just behind her. They looked like they belonged together, she realized with a start. Like this quiet intimacy was the most natural thing in the world. Raina stepped back then, gently patting Vivian's shoulder. "You should try to sleep a little earlier tonight," she said, her voice soft but matter-of-fact. "You've had a long day." Vivian didn't answer. She simply watched as Raina turned and walked toward the door. When she was gone, the room felt a little emptier. Only then did Vivian notice the absence of her usual evening companions. The crystal tumbler that typically held her first scotch of the evening sat empty on the desk. The cigarette case in her drawer remained unopened. For the first time in years, she had made it through an entire day without needing chemical comfort to dull the edges of existence. Her gaze drifted to the small plants visible through the office window, their leaves catching the city lights. Like tiny green beacons. A smile tugged at the corners of her mouth, soft, genuine, unguarded. Later that night, after finishing her work, Vivian found herself drifting toward Raina's room, pulled by a quiet gravity she couldn't resist. Moonlight spilled across the room, casting a silvery glow on everything it touched. Raina lay asleep on her side, one arm curled beneath her pillow. She looked so peaceful in sleep. Her face was relaxed, lips slightly parted as she breathed deeply and evenly. There was something about seeing her like this, unguarded, at peace, that made Vivian's heart tighten with an emotion she couldn't quite name. Moving with the silence, Vivian stepped closer to the bed. Raina had kicked off most of her blanket in her sleep, and Vivian gently pulled it back up, tucking it around her shoulders with the tenderness of someone handling something precious. Unable to resist, she leaned down and pressed the softest of kisses to Raina's forehead, her lips barely brushing the warm skin. "Good night," she whispered, so quietly that the words were more breath than sound. As she turned to leave, she missed the way Raina's breathing changed, the slight flutter of her eyelashes as consciousness briefly surfaced. Raina's heart hammered against her ribs as she felt the lingering warmth of Vivian's kiss like a brand on her skin. Her cheeks flushed hot in the darkness, and she fought the urge to touch her forehead where Vivian's lips had been. Instead, she pulled the blanket over her head, smiling so widely that her cheeks ached as she curled into the warmth of the gesture and the promise it seemed to carry. One evening, Vivian arrived home to find the apartment filled with the scent of vanilla and brown sugar. She followed the aroma to the kitchen, where she found Raina elbow-deep in cookie dough, flour dusting her apron and a smudge of batter on her cheek. "What's all this?" Vivian asked as she took in the scene. Mixing bowls covered the marble countertop, and the oven was preheating with a gentle hum. "I'm testing recipes. Chocolate chip cookies with a secret ingredient," Raina said with a conspiratorial grin. "Want to help? I could use an extra pair of hands." Vivian hesitated, but the way Raina was looking at her, eyes sparkling with invitation, that radiant smile that could have powered the city, made refusal impossible. "I should warn you," Vivian said, rolling up her sleeves. "I'm not exactly known for my culinary skills." "That's okay," Raina said. "I'll teach you. It's not about being perfect, it's about having fun." The concept of fun in relation to a task, any task, was so foreign to Vivian that she almost didn't know how to process it. But as Raina guided her through the steps, measuring flour, cracking eggs, explaining how to fold in the chocolate chips without overworking the dough, she began to understand. There was something deeply satisfying about working with her hands, about creating something from simple ingredients. When she inevitably got flour on her cheek, Raina's laughter was so delighted, so free of judgment, that Vivian found herself laughing too. She stepped close, her fingers gentle as she brushed flour from Vivian's cheek. The touch was soft, barely there, but it sent electricity racing through Vivian's nervous system. This close, she could see her own reflection in Raina's pupils, could smell the vanilla that seemed to cling to her skin like perfume. Their faces were inches apart, and for a moment that stretched like eternity, neither of them moved. Vivian felt her breath catch, felt the world narrow to just this. Raina's gentle touch, the way her lips were slightly parted, as if she too was struggling to breathe normally. The urge to close that small distance, to discover if Raina's lips were as soft as they looked, was almost overwhelming. But then Raina stepped back, colour flooding her cheeks, and busied herself with arranging cookie dough on baking sheets. They moved around each other in the kitchen with a new awareness, stealing glances when they thought the other wasn't looking. When the cookies emerged from the oven, golden brown and filling the apartment with their sweet scent, Raina insisted they eat them while they were still warm, settling together on the sofa with a plate between them and cups of herbal tea. "So, what's the secret ingredient?" Vivian asked, savouring the way the chocolate melted on her tongue. "Sea salt," Raina said with a grin. "Just a tiny pinch in each cookie. It makes the sweetness more intense, somehow. Brings out flavours you didn't know were there." Vivian smiled, but Raina's gaze had drifted to the window, where the rain painted slow silver trails down the glass. Her voice grew quieter, more thoughtful. "You know," she said, "every time life gets too heavy, I bake cookies. Just something simple: sugar, butter, chocolate. But when the scent fills the room and I take that first warm bite, for a few minutes, everything feels okay. Like I can breathe again." Vivian looked at her, listening without interrupting. "It sounds silly. That's my dream. To open a little bakery someday. Nothing big or fancy. Just a cozy place that smells like vanilla and hope, where people can come in from the rain and leave feeling just a little bit lighter. Sometimes I think it's impossible. Like it's too far away for someone like me. But it keeps me going. When I'm tired, when I feel like giving up, thinking about that dream is what keeps my feet moving. And every time I bake, it reminds me why I still believe in it. Because for those few moments, I'm happy. Really, honestly happy." There was a pause. Then Vivian spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "That doesn't sound silly at all," she said. "It sounds beautiful." Raina glanced at her, surprised by the gentleness in her tone. "If you ever open that bakery," Vivian added, "I'd like to be your first customer." Raina laughed, the sound light and unguarded. "Deal, but only if you help taste test the recipes." Vivian smiled, something tender blooming in her heart. As they sat together watching the rain streak down the windows, sharing cookies and dreams, Vivian realized that her life had been quietly, irrevocably rearranged around these moments. The corporate achievements that had once defined her felt distant now, blurred shadows compared to the clarity of Raina's laughter, the warmth of her presence, the sense of coming home. For the first time in her adult life, Vivian wasn't chasing success or trying to outrun emptiness. She was simply here, and it was enough. For Raina, too, something had shifted. She had spent so long surviving on her own, moving from job to job, holding her dreams close, because there was no one to share them with. But now there was Vivian, someone who listened, someone who looked at her like her thoughts mattered, like her dreams weren't foolish. There was space in her world now, not just for hope, but for connection. And with that came a warmth she hadn't dared believe in. Not just happiness, but the kind of belonging that made her believe, maybe, just maybe, her dream was no longer something she had to chase alone. The storm that arrived 3 nights later was violent, the kind that turned the city's lights into watercolor smears and made the penthouse windows shudder with each gust of wind. Vivian woke to the crash of thunder, her body jerking upright, as lightning illuminated her bedroom in stark, white clarity. The familiar panic clawed at her chest, that old terror that arrived with storms, bringing with it memories she'd spent years trying to bury. Her father's voice raised in anger, her mother's suitcase by the door, the sound of the door slamming with finality that had echoed through every relationship since. Barefoot, she padded into the living room and poured herself a glass of scotch. Her old habit, her old comfort. She sank into the corner of the sofa, tucking her knees up to her chest, and stared out the window. The city lights blurred behind sheets of rain, and for a long time, she said nothing. Just sat there, holding the glass in her hands, not drinking it. She was so lost in the past that she didn't hear the soft footsteps approaching until she felt the gentle weight of a blanket settling around her shoulders. Raina simply tucked the soft fabric around Vivian's trembling form before lowering herself quietly onto the sofa beside her. "The storm will pass," Raina said, her voice quiet but steady. "I don't like storms," Vivian admitted, the words torn from somewhere deep and private. "My mother left when I was 5 on a night like this. She never talked about her family, never allowed anyone close enough to share these carefully guarded wounds. But something about Raina's presence, about the non-judgmental silence she offered, made the truth feel safe. She found out my father was cheating. He had a 4-year-old son with someone else. That night they fought, loud, vicious. And then she walked out the door with a suitcase and never came back. The thunder outside rolled again, but Vivian barely blinked now. A few days later, my father moved his mistress and that boy into the house, my half-brother. But it was like I stopped existing the moment they arrived. My father only had room in his life for one child, and it wasn't me." Raina moved closer, her hand finding Vivian's in the darkness and squeezing gently. "I worked myself raw to win his approval. Perfect grades, perfect posture, perfect everything. But nothing was ever enough. I was invisible in my own home. Just excess." She finally looked at Raina. "I stopped trying years ago. I just replaced the goal. Swapped out 'make my father proud' with 'be untouchable.' It felt safer that way." The admission hung heavy in the air between them, years of pain distilled into a few carefully chosen sentences. Vivian had never told anyone about the crushing loneliness of those years, about how she'd learned to armor herself in success and solitude, because vulnerability only led to abandonment. "I'm sorry," Raina whispered, and the simple words carried more comfort than any elaborate sympathy could have provided. Instead of responding with words, Raina stood and moved to the sound system, selecting something soft and instrumental, piano and strings that seemed to absorb the violence of the storm outside. When she returned to the sofa, she extended her hand to Vivian with a gentle smile. "Dance with me," she said simply. "Sometimes we need to create our own gentleness when the world feels too harsh." "Here, now?" Vivian's voice cracked slightly. "Especially here. Especially now." There was something in Raina's expression, a quiet certainty, a belief that even in the middle of a storm, beauty could be created, that made refusal impossible. Vivian took the offered hand and allowed herself to be pulled to her feet. They moved together in the space between the sofa and the windows, their bare feet silent on the cold marble. Vivian's arms encircled Raina's waist while Raina's hands found their place on Raina's shoulders, and suddenly the storm outside seemed distant, muffled by the intimacy of their embrace. "You are the most beautiful, strongest person I know," Raina whispered as they swayed together. "What happened to you as a child? That wasn't your fault. You deserved love then, and you deserve it now." The words broke something open in Vivian's chest, years of carefully constructed walls crumbling under the weight of unconditional acceptance. She pulled Raina closer, their bodies fitting together like pieces of the same puzzle. "You're my sunshine," Vivian breathed against Raina's ear. "In a life that's been nothing but winter, you're the warmth I never knew I needed." In the soft glow of the lamp, with rain pattering against the windows, they moved until no space remained between them. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable. As sunrise. Soft at first, tentative, a question asked, and answered with the gentle pressure of lips meeting. Then deeper, more urgent, as years of loneliness and carefully guarded hearts finally found their match. Vivian's arms tightened around Raina's waist, pulling her impossibly closer as Raina's fingers tangled in the silk of her hair. When they finally broke apart, breathing heavily, Raina's hands framed Vivian's face with infinite tenderness. "I love you," she whispered against Vivian's lips. "I love you too," Vivian replied, the words falling like benediction in the space between them. Outside, the storm continued its fury, but within the circle of their arms, surrounded by the small plants that had brought life to sterile spaces, and the lingering scent of homemade cookies, Vivian felt something she had never experienced before: complete and utter safety. The rain that had once carried only memories of abandonment now sang of renewal, of second chances, of love that could weather any storm. Chapter 5. Perfect Harmony. 6 months had passed since that storm-swept night when everything changed between them. Vivian's penthouse had transformed into something that felt like home. Plants thrived on every surface, and laughter had become as common as their morning coffee ritual. Their days had fallen into a rhythm as natural as breathing. Vivian would wake to the sound of Raina humming in the kitchen, some cheerful melody that seemed to make the sunrise brighter. They would share breakfast at the small table by the window. Fluffy pancakes or perfectly scrambled eggs, always accompanied by coffee that tasted better because it was made with love. Evenings were even more precious. Vivian found herself leaving the office earlier, drawn by gentle presence, simple dinners, and the comfort of laughter. They would cook together, Raina teaching Vivian the secrets of combining simple ingredients into something magical. They would dance in the living room to soft music, read books curled together on the sofa, or simply talk for hours about everything and nothing. The scotch that had once been Vivian's constant companion now sat untouched in its crystal decanter, replaced by herbal tea and hot chocolate shared beneath the same blanket. But it was in the quiet moments, watching Raina tend to her plants with gentle hands, listening to her hum while she baked, feeling the steady warmth of her presence beside her in bed each night, that Vivian truly understood how completely her world had been transformed. She had spent decades building walls to protect herself from pain, but Raina had shown her that those same walls had also kept out joy, love, and every beautiful possibility life had to offer. It was on a Tuesday when Vivian's assistant knocked. "There's a call for you. A woman named Claire Laurent. She says she's your mother." The words hit like a physical blow. The voice was older, more fragile, but unmistakably familiar. "Vivian? My darling girl, is that really you? What do you want?" Vivian's voice was sharp as winter wind. "I want to see you. I'm staying at the Meridian Hotel. Room 412, I'll be here for 3 days. Vivian ended the call without another word, her hands shaking violently. When she burst through the penthouse door, Raina was there immediately. "She's back," Vivian said, the words tasting like ash. "My mother. She wants to see me." That evening, Vivian lay with her head in Raina's lap. "What if I see her and it changes nothing?" Vivian asked into the darkness. "What if I'm still that abandoned little girl?" "Then you'll know," Raina said softly. "And knowing is always better than wondering. You're the woman who built an empire, who learned to love despite every reason not to. You're not that little girl anymore." The next afternoon, Vivian stood outside room 412, Raina's hand warm in hers. "I'll be right here," Raina whispered. "Whatever happens, you're not alone." The woman was older, smaller than memory suggested. silver threaded through dark hair, and lines of sorrow mapped her face. "Vivian." Her mother breathed like a prayer. "You're so beautiful. I followed your career, every achievement. I'm so proud." "Don't," Vivian cut through the sentiment. "You don't get to be proud. You weren't there." "Why?" the question tore from Vivian's throat. "Why did you leave me? I was 20. Young, scared. When I found out about his affair and the other child, I broke. I thought you'd be better off with him. But the truth is I was just a coward, and I've regretted it every day since." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither was sure they could cross. "I became someone else after that," Vivian said. "Someone who couldn't be hurt because she couldn't feel anything at all. And now?" Claire glanced toward where Raina waited. "You seem different, happier. Now I have someone who taught me that love doesn't have to hurt." They talked for another hour, filling the spaces years had carved between them. When it was time to leave, Claire's hand rose as if to touch Vivian's face, then fell. "I don't expect forgiveness. That leaving you was the greatest mistake of my life." Vivian studied her mother's face, seeing the same grief she had carried. "I'm not that 5-year-old girl anymore. I learned something from Raina about love, about forgiveness. Maybe it's time I learned to let go of the past." She stepped forward and wrapped her arms around her mother's frail shoulders. They held each other, two women shaped by loss finally finding their way back to healing. "I love you," Claire whispered. "I've always loved you." "I know," Vivian whispered back, and for once she could say it without the weight of old wounds. 2 years later, Raina stood behind the counter of her own bakery, arranging fresh cookies in the display case with gentle precision. Sometimes she still couldn't believe this was real. The warm scent of vanilla filling the air, the soft hum of satisfied customers, the plants thriving in every corner. She had spent so many years moving through other people's spaces, cleaning their homes, serving their needs, invisible in her own life. Now she had this. A place that was entirely hers, built from flour and dreams and the kind of stubborn hope that refuses to die. But even more unbelievable was the woman watching her. From across the room, Vivian Laurent, elegant, powerful, untouchable, who had somehow looked past Raina's second-hand clothes and part-time jobs to see something worth loving. There were still mornings when Raina woke up expecting to find it all gone. Just another beautiful dream. Instead, she found gentle grey eyes and a love so steady it had taught her to trust in tomorrow. Across the room, Vivian stood in the golden glow of the bakery, watching her fiancé arrange cookies with the same careful attention she brought to everything she touched. The transformation in both their lives had been gradual but profound. The Ice Queen persona that had once defined her in the professional world had softened into something more open, more real. She still commanded respect in boardrooms, but now it came from genuine leadership rather than fear. Her relationship with her mother remained complicated but healing. Claire had returned to France after their reunion, and while their calls were cautious at first, each one brought them a little closer. There would always be scars, but they were learning to see them as proof of survival rather than evidence of defeat. But it was Raina who had changed everything. Raina who had seen past the armor to the woman beneath. Raina who had shown her that love could be soft without being weak, that vulnerability could be a source of strength rather than liability. Raina who made every day feel like a gift simply by existing in the world. The afternoon sun slanted through the bakery's windows, casting everything in golden light that made Raina's skin glow as she worked. A light rain had begun to fall, the kind of gentle shower that cleansed without destroying, that brought life rather than taking it away. The weather's turning, Raina said, glancing up from her, arranging with a smile that still had the power to stop Vivian's breath. It looks like we might get one of those beautiful rain and sun combinations. Perfect, Vivian murmured, her hand moving to the small velvet box in her jacket pocket. She had been carrying the ring for weeks, waiting for the right moment. But standing here in the shop that represented Raina's dreams made real. Watching the woman she loved work with such quiet joy, Vivian knew this was it. This was their moment. Raina, she said, and something in her voice made Raina look up, her hands stilling on the display case. Vivian crossed the small space between them, heart hammering as the rain intensified while sunlight continued streaming through the clouds. That magical combination that transforms the ordinary world into something enchanted. Do you remember that first day when you gave me that chocolate sample? Vivian began, voice soft but steady. You said you hoped it would bring sweetness to my day. Raina's eyes widened as understanding began to dawn, her hands coming up to cover her mouth as Vivian sank to one knee. You brought sweetness to my entire life, Vivian continued, opening the box to reveal a simple, elegant ring that caught the bakery's soft lights and scattered them like tiny stars. Raina, Vivian said, her voice breaking with emotion, will you marry me? Raina's face cycled through surprise, joy, and finally a love so profound it seemed to light her from within. Yes, she whispered, then louder, laughing through tears of pure happiness. Yes, of course, yes. Vivian slipped the ring onto Raina's finger with hands that shook with joy, rather than nerves, then rose to pull her fiancé into a kiss that tasted of promises, chocolate, and new beginnings. When they finally broke apart, breathless and laughing, Raina looked up at Vivian with eyes that shone brighter than any diamond. In that moment, Vivian understood that after every storm, if you're patient enough and brave enough, the light always returns. Sometimes life surprises you with someone who walks beside you, no matter the weather, who loves you through thunder and quiet alike, making even the ordinary feel like magic. The bakery's bell chimed softly as wind caught the door. A sound like celebration, like wedding bells, like the music of two hearts finally finding their way home. Outside, rain and sunshine continued their eternal dance, blessing the world, with the kind of beauty that exists only when opposites find harmony. Just like love, just like them. Thank you for listening to this love story. I hope it brought some warmth and light to your heart. Until we meet again in another story, stay gentle, stay hopeful, and keep believing in love. And remember, every heart deserves a love like sunlight through the rain. One that finds you in your darkest moments and reminds you that you are worthy of tenderness. Because your heart, with all its scars and dreams, deserves to be loved exactly as it is.